Black history isn't just about remembering the struggles of the past. It's about celebrating the power, resilience, and brilliance of a people who've shaped the very world we live in today. Throughout history, there have been moments and figures whose contributions were so impactful that they changed the course of history. But how much do we really know about the untold stories of Black excellence that didn't just change America, but changed the entire world? Today, we're diving into 5 incredible facts about Black history that might surprise you, inspire you, and make you see the struggle for equality and justice through an entirely different lens. These facts aren't just about history. They're reminders of the incredible legacies that have shaped the Black community's fight for freedom, equality, and empowerment. Fact 1. The true origin of Black History Month. The celebration of Black History Month has become an important tradition in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. But have you ever stopped to think about where it all started? Why February? Why a whole month? The history of Black History Month is rooted in a powerful movement that began as a simple week of recognition and was driven by the relentless vision of one man, Carter G. Woodson. It didn't start as a month, and it wasn't always a national celebration. In fact, Black History Month originated as Negro History Week, and it was not even initially intended to be a national event. In 1926, Woodson, a scholar deeply dedicated to preserving the history and culture of Black Americans, created Negro History Week. It was designed to draw attention to the often overlooked accomplishments of African Americans throughout history, particularly during a time when Black history was not taught in schools and was largely erased from mainstream narratives. Carter G. Woodson was born to formerly enslaved parents in New Canton, Virginia, in 1875. His family's struggles with illiteracy made him acutely aware of the importance of education and the barriers that Black people faced in accessing it. He would later reflect on how his parents, who were unable to read or write, instilled in him a deep appreciation for knowledge and education, even though they lacked formal schooling themselves. This foundation would shape Woodson's lifelong commitment to uncovering and preserving African American history. Woodson's journey toward creating Negro History Week began in 1915, when he co-founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH. The ASLH's goal was to research, document, and promote the history of Black Americans, a history that had been widely overlooked or distorted by the mainstream. Woodson earned his PhD from Harvard University, one of the first African Americans to do so, and he quickly realized that the historical narrative was overwhelmingly white and centered on European figures, leaving out contributions from Black Americans. In 1926, Woodson decided it was time to take action. He launched Negro History Week, aiming to encourage schools, communities, and the media to recognize and promote Black history. The week was not just about looking back at historical figures, but about empowering Black people, showing them their roots, and asserting their value to society. Woodson believed that if Black Americans were to ever truly reach their full potential, they needed to understand their past and recognize their own contributions to history. The timing of Negro History Week was carefully chosen. Woodson decided that the second week of February would be the week of celebration because it coincided with the birthdays of 2 monumental figures in American history, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Lincoln, of course, was the president who issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which ended slavery in the United States. Douglass, one of the greatest abolitionists, was a former enslaved man who became a prominent writer, speaker, and advocate for the rights of Black people. These 2 men represented different aspects of the fight for Black freedom, Lincoln for his political actions, Douglass for his advocacy, and their birthdays were a fitting foundation for the week-long celebration of Black history. However, Negro History Week was not initially intended to be a month-long celebration. Woodson chose the week-long format for a reason. He wanted to create focused, concentrated efforts within the classroom and the press, allowing educators and the public to learn about African American history in a more structured, organized way. He believed that by focusing on a single week, the nation could create a concentrated effort that would start small, but would eventually lead to broader acceptance and recognition of Black history. Over time, as the civil rights movement began to take hold in the 1960s, Black pride and Black awareness surged across the United States. People began to demand not just recognition, but the celebration of Black culture and accomplishments in every aspect of life. The push for greater inclusion of Black history in schools, museums, and institutions grew. This momentum led to the expansion of Negro History Week into what we now know as Black History Month. In 1976, during the United States bicentennial year, President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month. His proclamation urged Americans to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. Ford's recognition solidified the transformation of Negro History Week into the month-long celebration that we observe today. The idea was no longer just to focus on one week, but to dedicate an entire month to the celebration and study of Black history, a history that had been hidden, ignored, and dismissed for far too long. February was chosen for a deeper reason as well, as it is a month that historically had the least attention paid to it, thus serving as an act of reclaiming space. For African Americans, this month would become an opportunity to teach, reflect, and acknowledge the rich history, resilience, and contributions of Black people to the broader American story. The significance of Black History Month extends beyond just celebration. It is an acknowledgement of the sacrifices, struggles, and achievements of Black Americans who have shaped the history of the United States and the world. It also serves as a reminder of how much work remains in the fight for racial justice and equality. Black History Month isn't only about remembering the past. It is about inspiring action, about building solidarity, and about moving forward with the knowledge that Black history is American history. Carter G. Woodson's vision for Black history was one of empowerment and education, and his legacy has continued to grow since the first Negro History Week in 1926. Today, as we celebrate Black History Month each February, we remember the resilience of Black Americans, the pioneers who fought for equality, and the countless untold stories that deserve to be acknowledged. It is a time to reflect on the gains made, to honor those who fought tirelessly for a more just world, and to recognize how far we've come and how far we still have to go. So as we celebrate Black History Month, let it be a time of reflection, education, and empowerment, a reminder of the past, a celebration of the present, and a call to action for the future. Fact 2, the untold story of the first African-American woman to earn a U.S. patent. Sarah Boone was a remarkable African-American woman whose contribution to daily life is often overlooked, yet her innovation changed the way people cared for their clothes. Born in 1832 in North Carolina, Sarah Boone grew up during a time when the majority of African Americans were enslaved. Yet she defied the odds and became the first African American woman to receive a U.S. patent. Her legacy is intertwined with the larger history of Black women whose brilliance and perseverance helped shape the world, even if their names were not always etched into the history books. Boone was born into slavery, but after the Civil War, she was freed and determined not to settle for the limited opportunities that society had carved out for her. She became a skilled dressmaker and eventually opened a tailoring business in Connecticut. It was through this business that she gained firsthand experience with the intricacies of clothing care. She noticed the challenge many women faced when ironing clothes, particularly when trying to press the sleeves and more intricate parts of garments. At the time, ironing was done on flat surfaces or makeshift boards, making it a tedious and inefficient task. In 1887, Boone received U.S. patent number 473,653 for an improved design for the ironing board. Her version featured a narrower, curved surface, making it more suitable for ironing sleeves, cuffs, and other areas that were difficult to press using traditional flat surfaces. Boone's innovation wasn't just functional, it was revolutionary, transforming an everyday chore into a much easier and more effective task, particularly for women who were often tasked with the responsibility of maintaining their family's clothes. At the time, most households, particularly those with limited means, used flat wooden surfaces or even tables for ironing, which lacked the appropriate design to iron curved areas. Boone's design, being more compact, portable, and easier to use, provided a more efficient solution. While her patent may seem simple by today's standards, the impact was tremendous, especially for its time. It was a solution to a common problem that had been ignored by many inventors, proving that even the most practical and humble inventions could make a lasting difference. But Boone's legacy is not just about the ironing board. It's about what her success represented. At a time when African Americans faced extreme racial and societal barriers, and when women were expected to adhere to traditional roles, Boone's achievement was an act of defiance against the limitations imposed on her by society. Her innovation gave Black Americans, particularly Black women, a rare opportunity to prove that they could excel in fields of invention and innovation, two areas traditionally dominated by white men. For Boone, receiving a patent was an incredible achievement, as the process of applying for and receiving one was not an easy task, particularly for an African American woman in the 19th century. The patenting system was predominantly dominated by white men, and it was rare for Black individuals, especially women, to receive recognition for their ingenuity. Boone's persistence and ingenuity allowed her to overcome the racial and gendered barriers that sought to keep her from achieving her goals. She faced significant challenges that made her success even more remarkable. As a Black woman, Boone had limited access to education, financial resources, and the social networks that would typically help an inventor or entrepreneur succeed. The world of patents and inventions was closed off to her in many ways, and yet she managed to break through. Her work as a dressmaker gave her first-hand knowledge of clothing and ironing, providing her with the insight necessary to create an innovative solution. Her story is a powerful reminder that the best ideas often come from humble beginnings, born out of practical needs and real-life experience. But Boone's contributions go beyond the ironing board. Her story reflects the broader contributions of Black women in innovation, whose names and achievements were often hidden or ignored by mainstream history. Black women have long been at the forefront of creative solutions, yet their work often went unrecognized. By pushing through the systemic challenges of her time, Boone helped lay the groundwork for future African American women inventors. Her story paved the way for other women like Marie Van Britten Brown, the co-inventor of the home security system, and Dr. Patricia Bath, the ophthalmologist who developed a pioneering method for treating cataracts. Boone's achievements weren't just a victory for her, they were a victory for Black Americans during a time when the nation was still grappling with the aftermath of slavery and racial inequality. Her success symbolized self-determination and the power of Black innovation in an era when most doors were shut tight to people like her. Boone's invention wasn't just about creating a practical tool. It was a powerful statement about what Black people, and particularly Black women, could contribute to society if given the opportunity. Her legacy lives on today, in every household that uses an ironing board, a quiet testament to her ingenuity. But it's also a reminder of the countless contributions made by Black women whose names were forgotten or erased. Boone's story is not only one of innovation, it's a story of resilience, perseverance, and the untold history of Black female inventors. In reflecting on Boone's legacy, we are reminded of the importance of representation and visibility. Black women like Sarah Boone have often been written out of the historical narrative, but their contributions were critical to the development of the world we live in today. Their inventions and innovations were not just acts of personal achievement. They were vital parts of the story of progress and change in a world that sought to suppress their voices. Sarah Boone's story isn't just an inspiring footnote in the history of inventions. It's a crucial part of the larger story of Black empowerment and innovation. She proved that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, creativity and ingenuity could transcend the barriers of race and gender. Boone's invention wasn't just a product of her time. It's a timeless reminder of how ordinary people, with the right drive, ingenuity, and perseverance, can change the world. So the next time you pull out your ironing board, think of Sarah Boone, the woman who, against all odds, made that daily task a little easier, and whose contribution to the world was a symbol of the kind of ingenuity, resilience, and brilliance that often goes uncelebrated. Boone's legacy is more than just an invention. It's a reminder that every story, no matter how hidden or overlooked, has the power to inspire change and shape the future. Fact 3. The hidden history of the first Black U.S. Senator. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the United States found itself in the midst of a profound transformation, grappling with the remnants of slavery and the shifting dynamics of racial and political power. One of the most remarkable events of this time was the election of Hiram Rhodes Revels in 1870, the first African American ever to serve in the United States Senate. Revels' election was a historic achievement, but the story of his path to the Senate is one of struggle, resilience, and determination. Revels was born in 1827 in Fayetteville, North Carolina, to free black parents. His background was rare for the time, as most African Americans, particularly in the South, were enslaved. Growing up in an environment where education was often inaccessible to people of color, Revels was undeterred. His desire for learning was unwavering, and despite the obstacles placed in front of him, he found ways to pursue an education. After receiving a limited education in local schools, Revels attended Union Seminary in Indiana and later Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, where he became one of the first black men to attend and graduate from a predominantly white college. Revels' education was a vital tool that not only shaped his future, but also laid the groundwork for his work as a pastor, educator, and eventual civil rights leader. His determination to rise above the limitations of his time, particularly as a black man, marked the start of a life that would serve as an inspiration for future generations. Revels' path toward the Senate was significantly shaped by the Reconstruction era, a time when the Southern states were reintegrating into the Union and newly freed African Americans were asserting their rights as full citizens. During this period, the U.S. government passed a series of civil rights laws, including the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which abolished slavery, granted citizenship, and secured voting rights for black men. These legal victories were instrumental in the push for greater political and social inclusion of African Americans. In Mississippi, Revels became a prominent leader in the African American community and a vocal advocate for education and equality. He served as a minister and was appointed as the president of Alcorn State University, one of the first historically black universities in the United States. In his role as an educator, Revels helped shape the lives of many black students, championing education as a key to both individual and collective empowerment. The political landscape in Mississippi and much of the South was a battleground during the Reconstruction era. Many white Southerners resisted the changes brought about by the Civil War and sought to reassert control over black people. At the same time, newly freed African Americans were eager to claim their political rights. In 1870, when Mississippi held an election for its vacant U.S. Senate seat, Revels emerged as a clear choice to represent the state. His background in education, leadership, and his dedication to equality made him the ideal candidate to represent the needs and aspirations of the African American population. On February 25, 1870, Revels was elected to the U.S. Senate by the Mississippi State Legislature, winning by a vote of 81-15. This victory was not just a triumph for Revels, it was a landmark moment for the African American community. It demonstrated that black men, who had been denied the right to vote just a few years earlier, could now serve at the highest levels of American government. Revels was a symbol of the promises of Reconstruction, showing that African Americans could rise to positions of power and influence in a nation that had once enslaved them. Revels' time in the Senate was brief, just 1 year, but it was transformative. During his short tenure, he made significant contributions to civil rights, education, and the integration of the Southern states back into the Union. Revels was a staunch supporter of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. He also advocated for public education and social justice, understanding that the key to racial equality lay in access to education and the ability to participate fully in the civic life of the country. One of the most notable moments of Revels' time in office came when he delivered a powerful speech on the Senate floor in which he defended the rights of African Americans to be treated as equals. He argued that black Americans had fought for their country during the Civil War, and it was time for the nation to honor their sacrifices by granting them their full rights as citizens. His eloquent speech made clear that the struggle for equality was not just a moral issue, but a political and social necessity for the future of America. However, despite his groundbreaking achievements, Revels' time in the Senate was short-lived. After serving just 1 year, he was replaced by another senator, and the political climate began to shift. As Reconstruction came to an end in the late 1870s, The hard-fought gains made by African Americans were rolled back by Jim Crow laws and other discriminatory policies designed to disenfranchise black voters and enforce racial segregation. Revels' time in the Senate coincided with the collapse of Reconstruction, and the progress that had been made was met with fierce resistance. White Southerners sought to regain control, and federal troops withdrew from the South in 1877. This allowed Southern states to pass laws that effectively disenfranchised African Americans, keeping them out of political power for decades. It wasn't until the 1960s civil rights movement that African Americans began to make significant political gains once again, with the election of Edward Brooke in 1966, the first African American to serve in the Senate since Revels. Despite his short tenure, Hiram Revels' legacy remains powerful. His election to the Senate was a symbol of the great promise of Reconstruction, showing that African Americans could serve in positions of political power. Revels' victory and service paved the way for future black political leaders and inspired generations of African Americans to pursue careers in politics and public service. His legacy is a reminder of how hard-won progress can be and how fragile it can be in the face of resistance and oppression. Today, Hiram Revels' name lives on as a symbol of the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equality. His legacy reminds us that change is possible, and that even in the most difficult times, the courage and determination of a single individual can change the course of history. Hiram Rhodes Revels may have served just 1 year in the Senate, but his impact on the nation and the future of African American political leadership can still be felt today. Fact 4. The Harlem Renaissance's lasting impact on music and art. The Harlem Renaissance was not merely a cultural moment, it was a full-blown revolution that reshaped the American cultural landscape in the 1920s. Centered in Harlem, New York, this movement was about much more than just jazz and poetry. It marked a collective effort by Black Americans to reclaim their cultural identity and redefine what it meant to be Black in America. The period saw an explosion of artistic, intellectual, and political activity that would lay the foundation for movements that would follow, deeply impacting everything from literature and music to social justice. Harlem itself, in the early 20th century, became a symbol of Black resilience and potential. Thousands of African Americans had migrated to the neighborhood during the Great Migration, seeking freedom from the deep racial discrimination of the South. By the 1920s, Harlem had transformed into a vibrant hub for Black culture, intellectualism, and creativity, and what began as a small literary effort soon turned into a cultural revolution. While the Harlem Renaissance is most often remembered as a 1920s phenomenon, its roots trace back to earlier periods of Black intellectualism and activism. It grew out of the work done by Black colleges, intellectual societies, and publications like The Crisis, a magazine edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. These earlier movements focused on uplifting African American culture and promoting the idea that Black culture was just as valuable, rich, and capable of contributing to global civilization as any other. At the heart of the Harlem Renaissance was the belief that Black culture had its own distinct worth and that it deserved to be recognized and celebrated, not just in America but worldwide. One of the most profound aspects of the Harlem Renaissance was its literary explosion. Writers like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay, and Count Cullen produced works that explored Black life in America, offering a diverse portrayal of African American experiences. Langston Hughes, often hailed as the voice of the Harlem Renaissance, wrote poetry that captured the essence of Black America. His words were full of joy, struggle, pride, and pain, bringing to life the realities of the African American experience. One of his most famous poems, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, beautifully connects the African American experience to the long history of the African diaspora, emphasizing a deep connection to both history and identity. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. Zora Neale Hurston became another towering figure, especially with her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, which centered on the complex experiences of Black women in the South. Hurston's works explored Black identity, folklore, race, and gender, and her legacy continues to influence writers, filmmakers, and artists today. Similarly, Claude McKay embraced a more militant approach in his poetry, often celebrating Black pride and the fight for equality. On the other hand, Count T. Cullen explored the beauty and complexity of Black life through his poetry, blending classical forms with themes of racial identity. Visual art was equally transformative during this period. Aaron Douglas, one of the foremost artists of the Harlem Renaissance, was known for his modernist works that depicted the African American experience. His art played a crucial role in shaping the visual identity of the new Negro movement, which sought to redefine Black cultural expression in defiance of negative stereotypes. The Cultural Revolution wasn't limited to literature and visual art. Jazz music was perhaps the heartbeat of the Harlem Renaissance. The rise of jazz and blues in Harlem during the 1920s completely transformed American music, with improvisation and unique rhythms becoming the vehicle for expressing the emotions, struggles, and joy of Black Americans. Venues like the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater became legendary, hosting performances by some of the greatest jazz musicians in history. Icons like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Cab Calloway redefined jazz, pushing it into the mainstream and solidifying its place as one of the most influential genres in American music. Ellington, known for his sophisticated big band arrangements, created timeless pieces that blended jazz, classical, and swing. His compositions, like Mood Indigo and Take the A Train, are still performed today as jazz standards. Louis Armstrong, known for his unparalleled virtuosity on the trumpet and his gravelly voice, elevated jazz to new heights with groundbreaking performances and recordings. Armstrong's improvisational style would become the foundation for virtually all modern jazz, and his influence extends far beyond just jazz, shaping genres like pop and rhythm and blues. At the same time, the Empress of the Blues, Bessie Smith, gave voice to the emotional complexities of Black life, particularly from the perspective of Black women. Billie Holiday, another iconic figure, brought a soulful and emotional depth to jazz singing, paving the way for future generations of vocalists. Together, these musicians transformed the way the world thought about African American music, giving it the respect and recognition it deserved. The Harlem Renaissance wasn't just a celebration of culture, it was a movement for empowerment and resistance. It laid the groundwork for future civil rights efforts by creating a space where Black Americans could celebrate their culture, express their grievances, and demand equality. The intellectual and artistic achievements of the Harlem Renaissance provided a platform for Black Americans to claim their rightful place in the cultural and political life of the nation. This sense of pride, self-worth, and empowerment would go on to fuel the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The artists, writers, and musicians of the Harlem Renaissance didn't just influence the arts. They helped inspire leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who would go on to shape the fight for civil rights and racial justice in the following decades. The Harlem Renaissance's message of Black self-determination and empowerment continued to resonate in the decades that followed. Even though the Harlem Renaissance faded in the early 1930s with the onset of the Great Depression, its influence continues to be felt today. Its impact is seen not only in contemporary jazz, soul, and hip-hop, but also in literature, film, and visual art. Artists like Beyoncé, Kendrick Lamar, and Lauryn Hill continue to draw from the traditions of the Harlem Renaissance, blending them with modern influences to create new and innovative cultural expressions. The Harlem Renaissance was more than just a movement. It was the birth of a new Black identity, one that celebrated cultural heritage while demanding equality and recognition. It reshaped the way Black Americans saw themselves and how the world saw them. The legacy of the Harlem Renaissance continues to inspire and influence new generations of artists, activists, and thinkers, reminding us that Black culture is not just to be admired. It is to be celebrated, elevated, and recognized for its profound contributions to art, music, and social change. Fact 5. The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were more than just heroes of World War II. They were pioneers who not only helped secure victory for the Allies, but also broke down the racial barriers that had long excluded Black Americans from key military roles. These African-American men became the first black pilots and aircrew members in the U.S. military, forever changing the landscape of military service and racial equality in America. The journey of the Tuskegee Airmen didn't begin in the skies, but on the ground, where the U.S. military was deeply segregated. For much of American history, black Americans were systematically excluded from serving as combat pilots. They were limited to non-combat roles such as cooks and laborers, while white men dominated the ranks of military aviation. However, as the U.S. entered World War II, the need for pilots grew dramatically, and advocates like A. Philip Randolph and W.E.B. Du Bois pushed for African Americans to be included in military aviation. Their advocacy led to the creation of the Tuskegee Airmen Program in 1941 at Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college in Alabama, which became the training ground for these trailblazing pilots. Training at Tuskegee was no easy feat. The men had to learn to fly advanced aircraft, undergo rigorous physical training, and face the pervasive racism and skepticism from both their military commanders and the public. Many questioned whether black men could become successful pilots, dismissing them due to racial prejudice. Despite these challenges, the Tuskegee Airmen excelled. They were trained by both black and white instructors, many of whom were veterans of earlier wars. The program was demanding, with both classroom studies and hands-on flight experience. These men learned everything from aviation theory to combat maneuvers, preparing them to escort bombers on dangerous missions over Europe, North Africa, and Italy. Once they completed their training, the Tuskegee Airmen joined the 332nd Fighter Group and 477th Bombardment Group, becoming essential to the Allied war effort. Over 1,000 African-American pilots flew more than 15,000 sorties, providing crucial protection for bombers on long-range missions. Their primary mission was to ensure the safety of bombers by fending off enemy fighters, and they became renowned for their success in this role. They had an unparalleled record, never losing a single bomber to enemy fire, a feat that set them apart and earned them the nickname Red Tails, derived from the distinctive red paint on the tails of their aircraft. One of the most notable achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen was their role in the P-51 Mustang escort missions, where they provided air cover to bombers on deep penetration missions into enemy-occupied Europe. Their stellar performance earned them the privilege of escorting bombers carrying vital military supplies, securing key victories in the war. They were decorated with numerous awards for their bravery, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and Air Medal, further proving that African-American pilots could excel under the harshest conditions. The Tuskegee Airmen's legacy, however, extended far beyond their combat achievements. Their courage and success were critical in breaking the racial barriers that had kept Black Americans from serving in important military roles. They demonstrated that African Americans were more than capable of serving as skilled, effective pilots and aircrew members. Their success helped pave the way for future generations of African American soldiers and military leaders, challenging long-held racist assumptions and opening the door to further integration in the U.S. Armed Forces. The Tuskegee Airmen's contributions didn't end with the conclusion of World War II. Their service was instrumental in the eventual desegregation of the military by President Harry S. Truman in 1948. Their heroism served as a powerful example for the broader civil rights movement, inspiring leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and fueling the fight for racial equality in the United States. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that Black Americans could serve their country with honor and courage, and their success was a vital part of the cultural shift that began to change the way Black people were perceived and treated in the U.S. Even decades after the war, the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen continues to inspire. Their story of resilience and breaking barriers continues to encourage new generations of African Americans to pursue careers in aviation, military service, and leadership. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in the U.S., recognizing their tremendous contributions to the country. Their legacy is also preserved in films like The Tuskegee Airmen, 1995, and Red Tails, 2012, which dramatize their accomplishments and continue to introduce their story to new audiences. The Tuskegee Airmen's legacy serves as a reminder that the fight for racial equality is not confined to any single battle or generation. They showed that African Americans could rise to the highest levels of military service, and their courage continues to resonate today. These men were not just soldiers, they were pioneers who broke racial barriers, helped win a global war, and paved the way for future generations of African American leaders. Their achievements remind us that barriers can be broken, no matter how high they may seem, and their story continues to inspire not only Black Americans, but people around the world who fight for equality and justice. The Tuskegee Airmen were more than warriors in the sky. They were trailblazers, symbols of hope, and icons of Black excellence. Their story is a powerful testament to the enduring spirit of resilience, bravery, and the relentless pursuit of equality. Today, as we reflect on their contributions, we honor their legacy, and we continue to be inspired by their example of courage, determination, and the belief that anyone, no matter their background, can rise to greatness. From the courage of the Tuskegee Airmen to the creative brilliance of the Harlem Renaissance, from the pioneering spirit of Sarah Boone to the trailblazing leadership of Hiram Revels, and from the vision of Carter G. Woodson to the unwavering resolve of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the history of Black Americans is a story of triumph over adversity. It's a story that has shaped the very fabric of America and the world. What we've explored today is just a fraction of the immense legacy built by generations of Black Americans whose resilience, genius, and vision paved the way for future generations. Each of these individuals and movements represented not just a struggle for equality, but a celebration of Black excellence in all its forms. They fought not just for their own freedom, but for the freedom of every person to dream, to create, to lead, and to thrive. Black History Month is not just a time to remember the past, it's a time to reflect on the progress we've made, acknowledge the work still ahead, and honor the strength and beauty of the culture, history, and contributions that have shaped our world. These stories remind us that even in the face of tremendous obstacles, change is possible, and that the future is always being written by those brave enough to challenge the status quo. As we move forward, let us carry these stories with us. Let them inspire us to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, to continue breaking barriers, and to build a world where every voice, every story is heard and valued. The heroes we've celebrated today have left us with more than just legacies. They've left us with the tools to create change, the power to challenge injustice, and the inspiration to keep striving for a better tomorrow. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Remember, Black history is American history, and it's a story that's still being written every day by each of us. So let's continue to honor the past, embrace the present, and build a future where everyone's story is celebrated and heard. Until next time, let's keep learning, keep growing, and keep honoring Black excellence in all its forms. Happy Black History Month.